Here we are for another slideshow, professional writers. In this one, we'll look at 8 different 2-page technical descriptions. The purpose of the description is to explain a complex subject to unfamiliar readers. We can think of descriptions as a general category, like writing that might appear within a long report or manual, or as a specific genre, like a standalone document. For our current assignment, you're creating a 2-page description that could ideally have a place within a real-world context. This slideshow corresponds with Chapter 12 from our textbook, Descriptions, and it builds on the ideas from Chapter 11, Definitions, which was the subject of last week's slideshow. Viewing these 2-page technical descriptions should have 3 benefits. First, we'll see how previous students have addressed this assignment. Second, we'll assess organizational hierarchy and the emphasis of key points. And third, we'll explore possibilities for design and graphics. We'll assess these sample documents for their form, content, and design. By form, I'm referring to the 2-page frame that expresses information through both text and images. By content, I mean the structure of ideas and how those ideas connect. And by design, I'm talking about how those ideas are arranged and emphasized on the page. All these elements should work together to help us transmit our ideas to readers. Before we view these descriptions, I'll point out 2 key concepts from our textbook. First is that descriptions are typically objective or based in fact. Descriptions aren't the place for opinions or personal narratives. Our tone should be expository, almost like a corporate voice. With descriptions, we're trying to inform rather than persuade. Second is that descriptions don't need to be complicated in their structure. Predictability is fine. In last week's slideshow, we noted that a description might mimic the form of a 5-paragraph essay. On pages 207 to 208, our textbook identifies the elements and sequencing of a description such as this: the title, an introduction paragraph, the sequence of topics, interspersed visuals, and maybe a conclusion. The most important element is the sequence of topics, or the main points by which you're describing or illustrating your topic. Very briefly, let's look again at the principles of design we've seen in previous slideshows. I'm sharing these principles again because they're essential to understanding visual rhetoric, or the design and spatial presentation of ideas. In this class, we aren't creating standard academic papers, which are typically just pages of double-spaced writing in 12-point Times New Roman font. Instead, we're designing our documents to help aid our readers' comprehension. For instance, we might use typeface emphasis like bold or italics, we might create section headings, and we might incorporate images and graphics. These strategies can guide our readers' attention, make our document structure more evident, and they can make our pages more vibrant and appealing. The highlighted terms on this slide help us assess visual layout. Our textbook doesn't feature a list like this, but in Chapter 8 it stresses consistency, cohesiveness, navigation, and emphasis. Like resumes, technical descriptions can appear in many different formats and layouts. And like resumes, they should be logical at first glance. The relevant term we've discussed is usability, or how well a document fulfills the information needs of its audience. Usability is the first test of effectiveness for a technical description. Do readers know, when glancing at the page, how they're meant to approach it? If the document is usable, then readers feel comfortable rating it, finding access points to begin reading and locating information. Our first sample description covers Wrigley Field, home of the Chicago Cubs. Who would be the audience for a document like this? One option would be travelers to Chicago. Because Wrigley Field is such a mythic baseball stadium, it's the type of place out-of-towners want to visit. So you could imagine a document like this being made available at a tourism office, in a rack at the Chicago airport, at a restaurant in Wrigleyville, or even as a downloadable flyer on a website. Or it could be part of a series of stadium descriptions, one for each of the 30 MLB teams. This document begins with a standard sentence definition. Wrigley Field is a Major League baseball park located in Chicago, Illinois. It partitions its subject into 5 sections: the introductory paragraph, history, the stadium, which is 2 paragraphs, timeline of renovations and landmarks, and entertainment. That approach is logical, although we could test out other structural approaches as well. For instance, it seems like the timeline of renovations and landmarks could be combined with the history section. As for the content, it's quite a challenge to condense this topic onto just 2 pages, but the writer does a good job of covering the essentials and keeping her focus. It would be easy, for instance, to include a section about the Cubs winning the World Series in 2016, but that would be tangential to describing the ballpark itself. As for design, however, this document isn't very successful. We have bold typeface for the headings, yet the headings still aren't prominent enough to help readers navigate the page. Then the images are rather disruptive since they run from the left margin to the right margin and interrupt the text. On the first page, we could avoid this by shrinking that photo of the stadium and wrapping text around it, but that's harder to do with the image on the second page since it's a panoramic photo. And also it seems that black and white archival image might be more appropriate near the history section. And overall, the photos hardly serve a descriptive purpose. They're just filling space. In that regard, we'd say they're decorative rather than functional. The difference is that a functional image communicates ideas, whereas a decorative image just adds colors and varies the page design. I feel like this document is an excellent draft. It contains great ideas, but we could structure the information differently and experiment with the page design to make it even more engaging. This next description discusses the Mediterranean diet. Like the previous one, it begins with a sentence definition. The Mediterranean diet is a popular diet based on mimicking the eating patterns of those living in countries bordering the Mediterranean Sea. Yet I believe we could summarize the topic more effectively in the introduction. For instance, what foods does the diet emphasize? What do dietitians say about the subject? I know the document will address those questions, but the introduction paragraph, just a sentence really, is brief and circular. It says, basically, the Mediterranean diet is a diet based on the Mediterranean lifestyle. This document has a simple but appealing page design. Like the previous description, this one was probably made on Microsoft Word, but it seems the writer took more advantage of the toolbar. The headings are larger and more prominent. It's easier to see at a glance how the topic is partitioned into sections. The writer also uses vertical lists to present parallel information. Vertical lists is how our book describes bullet points on page 435. The writer also created that text box of additional resources at the end, which kind of serves like a works cited. On that topic, you aren't required to cite your sources according to MLA or APA style with your technical description, but you should still give credit where credit is due. Look at how this writer cites her sources fluidly within the text. Quote, a review published in the Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that people ... Or, quote, U.S. News rated the Mediterranean diet as the #1 ... I call that the journalistic style. You name the source and then paraphrase the information, all while keeping your own voice as a writer. Next, the images in this description are effective, though they appear crammed onto the first page. That food pyramid contains so much information that it saves the writer a bunch of words, but the food pyramid is almost too busy, too much text, too much to study. That's a problem with copying an image from one context and pasting it into another. I'd also try to avoid having your images jut out into the margins, but that's a small thing. Overall, this description is effective, informative, and usable. Our next description is on the multiplayer esports game Rocket League. Its design looks similar to the previous description, although there's more text on the page. The headings are still prominent, helping us see the sequence of topics, and it includes a few graphics and vertical lists. If I recall, this writer played Rocket League himself, and he hardly needed to conduct any research. I'd probably encourage you to take a similar approach by choosing a topic for your own technical description that you know well. That way you can think about how you would teach others about it. You possess experiential knowledge rather than research knowledge. Either approach is fine, but I imagine that this document felt less like homework because the writer chose a topic he enjoyed. When looking at the content, I might suggest cutting back on some hyper-specific details. For instance, on the second page, the writer provides the rosters for 8 different Rocket League teams, and it starts to look like gobbledygook. A reader might not care that Squishy Muffins, Torment, and Gimmick make up the Cloud9 roster, or that Violent Panda, K-Dop, and Turbo Polestar are on Team Dignitas. And that does raise the question of who the writer's intended audience might be. One small design thing, I would probably bump that image of the playing field down to the bottom right corner of the first page. Doing so would space the page more evenly, and the image wouldn't be so disruptive to the flow of text. Overall, though, what a fun document, and you can see that this writer found plenty to say while introducing Rocket League. Here's a description on the Tahoe Tweezer, a 36-minute concert jam from the rock band Phish. I made this one. I created this document to focus my efforts when I was writing a nonfiction essay about the song. My problem was that I didn't know anything about musical theory, so when I was researching my essay, I compiled way too many notes. I had to be more strategic, so I challenged myself to organize my thoughts onto just 2 pages. I tried to imagine an audience of readers who are unfamiliar with the band Phish and the song Tweezer. In turn, I had to define key terms and make an objective argument for the song's importance. Although the headings don't reflect it, I organized this document into 3 sections: introduction, background, and analysis. You might think it's an odd writing practice for me to create this description only for myself, but the process of writing, editing, and designing it made me much more confident with my source material. There is a lot of text on these pages. I tried fitting in as much information as I could. But I also tried keeping the paragraphs short so that the text didn't feel too intimidating. As for the graphics, that first one is a fan-drawn schematic of the song's key changes. You see I cite the source within the caption. Then there's the album cover art, and on the second page I typed the song's lyrics into a text box. Finally, I use those green boxes to chart the song into its movements. I think this document is pretty darn good, but of course I think that I wrote it. I suspect this next document was prepared in a program other than Microsoft Word, maybe Adobe InDesign. It covers the 5 principles of gestalt grouping, or as the first sentence suggests, unity between elements of a design. In this document, the visuals pull a lot of weight. That's because the topic itself is about images and how we interpret them. This document, of course, would be much less successful without those images. They communicate by showing rather than telling. And they just look nice since they're simple and since they're coordinated by color, giving the document a sense of continuity. Aside from design, this document defines its terms well. The bulk of the 2 pages is used to explain the 5 principles: similarity, continuation, closure, proximity, and figure/ground ambiguity. These aren't new words to us, but it helps to have them defined within the context of design. The first sentence of each of those sections is basically a straight definition. For example, proximity describes the simple concept that elements placed closely together are read visually as a group, while elements placed further apart appear separate. The writing in this document is lean and direct. My only complaint is that there's no river of text. It doesn't visually flow from one section to the next, and the document feels disjointed. Even so, I'm not sure how to fix that issue, since this description necessarily gives so much page space to its images. This description on Putin is a real delight. It's so well designed, certainly nothing I'm capable of producing. It looks a lot different from the descriptions we've seen already, yet its structure isn't all that different. On the first page, we have the sentence definition, a large image illustrating the subject, and a 3-paragraph section on its history. On the second page, we have the etymology, ingredients, a section on regional variations, and a guide to finding Putin in the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. The purpose here is informative. Yet it's such a fun document with such an enticing image that it ends up being persuasive. It makes you hungry. The images allow the writer to avoid using too much text, but she also doesn't skimp on information. For instance, I could imagine how the classic trio section could be dragged out for an entire paragraph, but simply listing them and providing images does the trick in a much more visually engaging way. When you think about it, the classic trio section is like a bullet point list. The writer played to her strength with document design and created a 2-page description that's both fun and informative. Next is a 2-page spread on Daredevil that appeared in the March 2015 issue of Wired. I hung on to it because it seems so similar, in theory, to what we're creating for this assignment in writing in the professions. And yet it looks so different. The writers here are using images rather than straight text to tell the story of the Daredevil character. It's a 2-page document that tries to demystify or untangle a big subject. In that way, it's like our technical descriptions. It looks different, but the informative purpose is the same. That said, looking at this spread makes me kind of anxious. It reflects the Wired aesthetic of being colorful, busy, and almost intentionally disorienting. If a student turned in a document like this for the technical description assignment, I'd be like, well, you have conviction. It's daring and complex, the type of thing you want to study. Not exactly what we're producing in our class, but it's interesting to see how the description format is applicable to other contexts. Finally, this description comes from a set of lesson plans and activities offered on the Museum of the North website. The primary audience is the junior curators, that is, children 6 and older, as well as their families. Like the Daredevil example, this document isn't a technical description in the strict sense of the term, although it accomplishes the same things we're doing in our assignment. It identifies a specific audience, it has a distinct context of use, and it has an educational or informative purpose. It's very effective. The layout and simple language make it easy to skim and easy to understand. And it's generous with the information it shares, and it fits a lot onto just 2 pages. It actually makes me curious to learn more about the solar system. Not much more to say about this document except that it demonstrates an excellent awareness of audience. The fun facts are very suitable for elementary school kids and their teachers or families. It represents the Museum of the North well. In conclusion, we looked at these 4 text-heavy descriptions. Some are more effective than others. I would guess that most of you will produce a technical description that looks about like these ones. You could replicate these designs by creating the text, adding section headings, and including illustrations. Either Microsoft Word or Google Docs would work to create something like this, although Word is much better for desktop design. Which one of these is your favorite? Or which one, when viewed in thumbnail, appears most inviting? They're all fairly similar, to be honest. They explain their subjects with text, they're separated into short sections, and they incorporate images to help illustrate some key concepts. We also viewed these 4 descriptions, which rely more on images and ambitious page design. I'm impressed with these documents because their creators have computer skills that I lack. They're all quite original, and they're still broken into sections that sequence the topic into its main categories. Which of these is your favorite, or which one would you be most interested to read in full? They're quite distinct and certainly more eye-catching than the previous 4. But as you're creating your own technical description, you can produce the design you're most comfortable with and which you think your readers will respond to best. To conclude this slideshow, we'll glance back at 2 rhetorical concepts from Chapter 3, providing audiences with usable information. The first piece of advice is that you should analyze your document's audience. Our book provides a bullet point list of audience-related questions to ask when beginning a piece of writing. I've posted the 3 most relevant ones here. You should especially consider your audience's familiarity with the technical details of your subject. You don't want to select an audience for your description who already knows everything about your subject, because then what's the point? But considering your audience's background, you want to provide enough details in simple, accessible prose that they can understand your subject without feeling overwhelmed. The second piece of advice is to determine your document's purpose. Our book also lists some bullet point questions you can ask to help with this process. You should consider what your readers will do with the information you provide or how you hope they'll respond. Both of these sets of questions should help you envision how your description could be used outside of the classroom, since I'm always reminding you to imagine your documents fulfilling a real-world rhetorical context. And that concludes another slideshow. As always, please be in touch if you have any questions or concerns, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the subjects you've chosen for your technical descriptions.